The sun had vanished behind a shroud of unnatural gray clouds, casting Delphi in an eerie half-light that seemed neither day nor night. The sacred city, once alive with the hum of devotion, now echoed with the silence of despair. Marble columns lay shattered across dust-choked streets, their carved inscriptions fractured and illegible. Statues of gods, once towering and serene, were toppled and cracked, their stone faces staring blankly at a sky that refused to answer their gaze. Priestesses wandered among the ruins, their voices trembling, murmuring in tongues that even the oldest scribes could not recognize. From the depths of the crumbled temple of Apollo, a flickering flame struggled to survive, casting shadows that danced like spirits upon the broken stones. The oracle's voice, once clear and powerful, now came as a fractured whisper, fragmented, haunting, and impossible to interpret. A young scribe, pale and trembling, ran through the streets, clutching a handful of tattered scrolls. His eyes widened as he spotted a familiar figure approaching across the cracked plaza. Even through the haze, the sheer presence of Heracles was unmistakable. Broad-shouldered, weathered, yet somehow timeless, the son of Alcmena, carrying the quiet weight of legends upon his frame. Heracles, the scribe gasped. You must, Delphi. The oracle. She speaks. Heracles held up a hand, steadying the boy. His voice was calm but heavy. Slow yourself. Speak clearly. What has happened here? The scribe could barely catch his breath. The oracle? She is mad. The prophecy, it is broken. She says, he fumbled with the scrolls, unrolling them to reveal half-written words and strange symbols. The pride of Olympus shall bleed. The sun of mortal strength must rise. Shadow consumes the crown of gods. Heracles' eyes narrowed. He knelt, touching the scroll with a careful hand. The words felt heavier than stone, and yet there was a strange shimmer in the air, as if the prophecy itself had weight and substance beyond mere ink and parchment. Memories stirred, visions of monsters slain, kings humiliated, cities spared or destroyed by his hands. He remembered the 12 labors, the blood and fire, the weight of every life he had taken or saved. Shadow consumes the crown of gods. He muttered, voice low. It speaks of Olympus itself. Something stirs. Something I feared might never awaken. The air shifted suddenly and the wind died. Even the birds fell silent, perching in stunned stillness upon the broken columns. Far above, the storm that had once answered Zeus's command refused to form. The heavens themselves seemed muted. Heracles clenched his fists, sensing a presence that was not entirely mortal, not entirely divine, a creeping dread that fed upon pride, arrogance, and fear. He rose to his full height, scanning the shattered city. "Show me where the oracle is," he commanded. The scribe led him through streets lined with broken statues and crumbling temples. Shadows twisted unnaturally in the corners of Heracles' vision, vanishing when looked at directly, leaving only the memory of movement. Finally, they reached the inner sanctum of the Temple of Apollo. The massive doors were cracked and hanging from their hinges. Inside, the air shimmered with a heat not born of fire. There she was. The oracle sat cross-legged upon the stone dais, her hair disheveled, eyes wide and unfocused. Her mouth opened, and a sound that was half song, half scream echoed through the temple. Words tumbled from her lips, broken and disjointed, yet each syllable carried a sharp weight that cut into Heracles' soul. Shadow. Rising crown. Consumed mortal sun. Must save or... The voice trailed into a strangled moan, and the oracle collapsed, trembling. Heracles knelt beside her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. It is not yet too late. Show me the way. But the oracle's eyes rolled back, leaving only a pale white void. Heracles withdrew his hand slowly, sensing that this moment was not about answers, but a warning. A darkness had begun to move, something that no god, not even Zeus, could command or contain. From the shattered ceiling above, A distant tremor ran through the temple, cracking stone and dust into the air. The ground groaned beneath their feet, and the air pulsed with a strange, almost living energy. Heracles felt it coiling, feeding, growing, a presence older than Olympus, older than mortals, and more cunning than any beast he had faced. Athena's voice, soft yet commanding, whispered in his mind, weaving through the turmoil of fear and doubt. "You must rise, Heracles. The shadow has begun. Your strength alone will not be enough. But your heart, your courage, they may yet turn the tide." Heracles clenched his jaw, staring out through the broken walls of Delphi toward the gray horizon. His labors had ended. His peace had begun. And yet, the world, the gods, and perhaps even his own legacy, now demanded that he rise again. The tremor deepened. The air thickened. And in the darkness that spread beneath the city, faintly glowing veins of corruption began to writhe and pulse across the earth. Heracles drew a deep breath, tightening his grip on the hilt of his sword, his eyes blazing with resolve. The shadow was coming, and Delphi was only the beginning. The mountains of Greece rose like silent sentinels beneath a sky that had forgotten its voice. For days, Heracles traveled from Delphi, following the trail of omens and whispers, yet the world seemed to shiver under a quiet he could not name. Rivers once bright with reflection now crawled sluggishly through the land, their waters dull and gray. Fields that had once fed towns for generations lay cracked and brittle, the soil thirsting for a rainfall that would never come. Birds circled in erratic patterns overhead, their wings beating against still air as if the sky itself resisted movement. Wolves howled in the distance, a lonely, mournful cry echoing through valleys where they once hunted freely. Even the sea seemed trapped in suspended motion, waves frozen mid-crest, as though nature itself held its breath. Heracles' boots crunched over dry earth, his eyes scanning for signs of life and yet sensing the unnatural absence of it. He remembered storms in his youth, fierce, chaotic, but honest. Lightning that split trees, wind that bent mountainside pines, and rain that cleansed the dust of cities. Now there was nothing. A profound silence had settled over Greece, and with it, a gnawing sense of dread. He reached the edge of a cliff overlooking the Aegean. The waves licked the rocky shore, but without the gusting winds that once shaped them, they moved with ghostly sluggishness. Heracles clenched his fists, the weight of foreboding pressing upon him. "They say Zeus calls the storms," he murmured, "but the storms no longer answer him." A sudden crack of light flickered across the sky. Not lightning, not thunder, but a faint, jagged glimmer of something darker. Heracles' eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary tempest. The air around it shimmered unnaturally, almost alive. He felt it then. A pulse, a hunger, a twisting presence feeding on the imbalance of the world. He descended into a village that lay in the shadow of Mount Parnassus. Smoke rose from a collapsed roof, but there was no fire beneath it. Villagers stared with hollow eyes, mouths moving silently, unable to speak. Children clung to their mothers as if the absence of storms had left the world unmoored, its rules suspended. An elder approached Heracles, voice trembling. "The skies, they betray us. The fires burn without thunder. The seas, they stagnate. And in the shadows, we see things. Things moving where no one walks. Something comes, and we are helpless." Heracles' jaw tightened. His gaze turned upward toward Mount Olympus. The golden palaces that had once gleamed in sunlight now seemed distant and cold, separated by an invisible veil. No bolt of lightning answered Zeus's call. No roar of storm clouds heralded the king's will. Even Olympus was not immune. At night, Heracles slept under a grove of gnarled olive trees, restless. The air was thick with anticipation, and in the dreams that visited him, Athena appeared, robed in silver light, her eyes sharp and unyielding. The shadow spreads where pride falters. Heracles. The gods themselves are not safe. You must seek the path they dare not tread. The storms are weak, the king powerless, and yet all is not lost. You will need more than strength. You will need wisdom, courage, and the heart to face what even the gods fear. Heracles awoke to a silence so complete it hurt. The stars above were dull and unsteady, as if the night itself feared to shine. On the horizon, a storm gathered, but it was no ordinary storm. The clouds writhed unnaturally, twisting into jagged shapes that flickered with dark light, and from its center no thunder roared. Lightning struck the earth, but not from Zeus. It arced with a strange, unnatural purpose, illuminating faces of mortals staring in terror, and shadows that seemed to slither just beyond the edges of vision. The shadow had begun its play, testing its reach, feeding on fear, on weakness, on the silence of a god who could no longer command the storm. Heracles gripped the hilt of his sword, muscles coiled like springs, eyes blazing with resolve. The world mortals and Olympus itself were vulnerable, and he alone could act before the shadow's hunger grew too great. The silence persisted, heavier now, pressing on him from all sides. He felt it, a darkness older than gods, more cunning than monsters, and infinitely patient. It was the first true omen of what was to come, a reminder that the greatest battles were not always fought with sword or spear. And with that, Heracles set his gaze toward the horizon, toward the rising storm, and whispered to himself, "If Olympus cannot command the heavens, then I will stand where they cannot." The air was heavy with the scent of salt and decay as Heracles descended toward the coastal plains near the ancient ruins of Phocis. The skies, though muted in color, were restless. Dark clouds twisted unnaturally, and the wind, long absent, whispered as though it carried warnings from some unseen mouth. Fishermen had abandoned their boats. Crops wilted in the fields. Even the goats, usually nimble and carefree, huddled together in frightened clusters. Heracles' eyes scanned the horizon, alert for any sign of unnatural movement. The tales he had heard along his journey were growing stranger, more urgent. Shadows that could not be cast, fires that refused to burn, waters that stood still, all pointed toward a single truth. Olympus was weakened, and the world below was being tested. And then he saw it, a ripple across the earth, subtle at first, like the trembling of a serpent beneath the soil. Heracles dropped to one knee, hands pressing the dirt, feeling the pulse of something ancient. He had faced monsters before, monsters born of divine will, of mortal fear, but this was different. This was the guardian of Kronos himself, a relic of a forgotten age, long thought slain or imprisoned. The ground ruptured. From the earth erupted a serpent larger than any temple Heracles had ever seen, its scales black as night, and eyes glowing with an eerie, hypnotic light. Its tongue flicked the air, tasting, testing, as if sensing the decay of Olympus itself. The beast's roar rolled across the coast like thunder, but no god had commanded it. This was chaos incarnate, a reminder that even the Titans had long memories. Heracles rose, hefting his club. Memories of past battles flashed before him. The Nemean lion, the Hydra, the many beasts he had conquered through strength, cunning, and courage. But the serpent was different. It was no mere creature. It carried the weight of primordial power, and the shadow, the corruption spreading through Olympus, hung in its aura like a storm cloud. The serpent struck first, coiling with blinding speed. Its massive head lunged, jaws snapping with the force to crush stone. Heracles dodged, rolling across the jagged rocks, and swung his club, striking the beast's scales. Sparks flew, but the blow barely scratched it. "This is no ordinary guardian," Heracles muttered, eyes narrowing. "It knows Olympus. It knows me." The serpent's tail smashed into the cliffside, sending boulders tumbling into the sea. Waves rose unnaturally, though still curiously slow, like water trapped between worlds. Heracles realized then that the shadow was reaching through the serpent, animating it with cunning, feeding on the weakening of the gods. This was no mere battle of strength. It was a test of wit, will, and courage. He leapt onto the serpent's back as it lunged, gripping its slick, armored scales. The creature writhed, thrashing violently, but Heracles held on. With his free hand, he drew a dagger forged in his early labors, striking at the joints of its scales, finding weak points through which his strength and experience could pierce. Each strike was a conversation, a negotiation of force and understanding between hero and monster. The battle stretched on, hours passing like minutes under the shadowed clouds. Heracles felt fatigue clawing at his body, but his mind remained sharp. He remembered Athena's words, "Strength alone will not suffice." The shadow tests more than your arm. It tests your heart. Finally, with a mighty roar that shook the cliffs and echoed across the sea, Heracles drove his dagger deep into the serpent's underbelly. The creature shrieked, coils flailing, before collapsing in a thunderous crash that cracked the earth. The glow in its eyes dimmed, and the unnatural ripple across the soil stilled. Breathing heavily, Heracles stepped back, surveying the aftermath. The serpent was gone, but the corruption lingered, a faint, pulsing darkness in the cracks of the earth, crawling invisibly into the soil, the rocks, and the waters. The shadow was patient. The shadow was eternal. Heracles knew this battle was only a prelude. Olympus was falling slowly, quietly, and the creatures it had once commanded were rising in its absence. The lesson was clear. Brute strength could win a fight, but it could not stop the darkness from spreading. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, a new chill settled across the land. Heracles' eyes burned with determination. He would need more than muscle, more than courage. He would need insight, allies, and wisdom. And the shadow would test him at every step. He turned inland, toward the forests and mountains where the next omens awaited. The journey was only beginning, and already the world he knew was unraveling. The foothills of Mount Ossa loomed like jagged teeth against the dim horizon, their peaks shrouded in a mist that clung to the world like memory itself. Heracles stood at the entrance to a cave hidden among the crags, a place older than any mortal settlement, older even than some temples of Olympus. This was no ordinary cavern. It exhaled a cold that seemed to whisper his name, and the shadows inside moved as though alive. Athena's warning echoed in his mind. The labyrinth of echoes holds what you have tried to forget. Only by confronting your past can you survive what is coming. Strength alone will not guide you here. Heracles tightened his grip on his club, stepping cautiously into the darkness. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp stone and something older, something primordial. As his eyes adjusted, the walls seemed to pulse, faintly shimmering as if the cave itself were breathing. With every step, the echoes of past deeds grew louder, screams of the Nemean lion, the roar of the Hydra, the cries of innocents he had failed to save, and the laughter of gods who had mocked his efforts. The labyrinth twisted unnaturally, corridors folding back upon themselves, leading him to places both familiar and impossible. At one turn, he saw the child he once was, innocent, fearful, unaware of the path he would have to walk. At another, he glimpsed the ghosts of those lost in his past labors, Iolaus, Deianira, the women and men whose fates had intertwined with his own. They were neither cruel nor forgiving, merely silent witnesses to his failures and triumphs alike. Then came the first test. Shadows emerged along the walls, dark shapes that mirrored his every movement, twisting his own reflection into forms of doubt and fear. One shadow bore the face of Zeus, smirking with arrogance. Another became Heracles himself, but older, weary, hollow-eyed, whispering, "You are not enough. You never were enough." Heracles swung his club at the nearest shadow. The blow passed through it as if it were mist, and the echo of his strike multiplied, reverberating endlessly through the cavern. Each swing forced him to face a memory of a past decision, each impact a moral reckoning, moments of pride, moments of hesitation, moments when his strength could not save. Hours, or was it days? Passed. Time in the labyrinth had no meaning. Heracles pressed onward, his muscles screaming, his mind swimming with visions, yet he could not turn back. In a vast chamber at the labyrinth's heart, a mirror of water waited, still and black. He knelt beside it, peering into the surface. The reflection that stared back was not entirely his own. It was a man burdened by every choice, every failure, every death he had caused or could not prevent. And yet, beneath the weight, he saw the spark of resolve that had carried him through the 12 labors. The spark that had made him a hero. A voice, familiar yet distant, whispered from the mirror, "You cannot hide from what you are, Heracles. The shadow knows all, sees all. Only by embracing both your light and your darkness can you hope to prevail." Heracles gritted his teeth, stepping away from the water. He struck the walls with his club, not in anger but in affirmation. The labyrinth trembled and shifted, the shadows receding into the cracks of the stone, leaving him standing alone. Though battered and exhausted, he felt clarity settling into his mind for the first time in years. Outside the labyrinth, the wind began to stir, carrying a faint scent of rain, a reminder that the world still had balance, fragile though it might be. Heracles emerged from the cave, sunlight, or what passed for it in the shadow of the dark clouds, falling on his battered form. The echoes of memory lingered, but he carried them with resolve rather than guilt. The shadow was rising, and Olympus teetered. Monsters would come, gods would falter, and mortals would suffer. But Heracles now understood something vital. Before he could confront the corruption consuming Olympus, he must first confront the reflection of himself, his choices, his pride, and his heart. He tightened his grip on his club and gazed toward the distant coast, where storms still gathered unnaturally and whispers of chaos stirred. Ahead lay trials not of muscle alone, but of mind, soul, and courage. And Heracles was ready to face them all. A silver mist clung to the peaks of Mount Ossa, curling through jagged cliffs and ancient trees like serpents of smoke. The world below was muted in color and sound, the air thick with a sense of expectation, as though the very winds held their breath. Heracles stepped onto the plateau, the jagged stones biting at his sandaled feet, and the mist swirled around him in patterns both natural and impossible. Before him, a column of light split the fog like a blade of polished steel. In its glow, Athena appeared, radiant and terrible in her beauty, her armor gleaming, her eyes reflecting the wisdom of ages. Her lance rested at her side, but it was her gaze that weighed most heavily on Heracles. "Heracles of Tyrants," she said, her voice both commanding and serene, echoing as if carried by the winds themselves. "You have fought monsters, titans, and even gods. But what you face now is no foe of muscle or fang. This is a trial of the soul. Will you endure it, or will the darkness that spreads across Olympus consume you?" Heracles' grip tightened around his club. He had fought impossible beasts, survived divine wrath, yet this was unfamiliar. He had never faced a god as judge of his spirit, rather than as opponent of his flesh. "I will endure," he said firmly, though a cold tremor ran down his spine. "Whatever this trial is, I will not fail." Athena inclined her head, and the plateau dissolved. The mist thickened until Heracles could no longer see his own hands. Around him, whispers rose, first indistinct, then forming into voices he knew. His past deeds, choices, and failures coalesced into forms, as if the mountain itself were reflecting every shadow of his soul. The mirror of decisions before him. A vision appeared, a battlefield scarred by his past labors. The Nemean lion's blood still stained the earth, the Hydra's heads writhed as if alive, and the cries of those he failed echoed across time. Heracles stepped forward, his heart hammering, and the first test began. From the shadows of memory, figures emerged. Some were friends, some foes. Each offered him a choice: to strike, to spare, to sacrifice, or to act for selfish gain. The ghost of a fallen ally, Olympus, appeared, clutching a wound Heracles had not healed. "Will you fight for me again?" even if it costs you everything? A child appeared, lost in the flames of a village Heracles had saved too late. Save me, or let the fire consume us both. Choose wisely, hero. Heracles' sword and club felt heavy in his hands, not for their weight, but for the burden of choice. He realized that every swing, every decision, carried consequences beyond immediate strength. One wrong act could echo into eternity. He acted with care, not haste, choosing the paths of wisdom and compassion, even when it hurt his pride. The path of temptation, as the visions faded, another test arose. Temptations manifested as radiant figures, each embodying something he longed for or feared: mortality's escape, the offer to live forever, free from suffering. Absolute vengeance, a chance to strike Zeus or other gods who had wronged him. Mortal admiration, kings and cities praising him, but at the cost of innocent lives. Heracles felt each pull of desire, each whisper tempting him toward pride, fear, and selfishness. For a moment, doubt crept in. Could he resist the easy path, the power that even Olympus might envy? Athena's voice cut through the illusions. Choose not what is easy, Heracles, but what is just. Choose the path that preserves balance, even when it is unseen and thankless. With gritted teeth and a steady heart, Heracles rejected each temptation, letting his courage and honor guide him. The illusions shattered, leaving only the sound of his own breathing and the echo of distant thunder, the first sign that the heavens themselves stirred at his resolve. The trial of faith, finally. Athena vanished, leaving Heracles in near-total darkness. The shadows coalesced into forms of gods, mortals, and monsters alike, each corrupted by arrogance, greed, or fear. The labyrinth of illusion was treacherous. He could not rely on sight, and every step required faith in himself, in the lessons of past labors, and in the balance he had learned to uphold. The shadow flickered at the edges, testing him, whispering of doubt and despair. You are alone. Olympus is lost. Even your strength cannot save you. Heracles remembered the faces of those he had saved, the lessons of his past labors, and Athena's guidance. Step by step, he moved through the illusions, trusting his instincts, acting not with force but with judgment, compassion, and clarity. Climax. The vision of responsibility at the heart of the trial. A vision unfolded, a city of mortals suffering, while gods fought among themselves, blind to the consequences. The shadow hovered, feeding on chaos. Heracles realized that the world's fate did not depend on anger, pride, or raw strength. It depended on responsibility, courage, and the willingness to act where others failed. He raised his arms, not in combat, but in affirmation of his choice. I will not abandon mortals or gods alike. I will act. I will endure. The visions shattered, and Athena appeared once more, radiant and approving. You have passed, Heracles. Strength is admirable, but wisdom, courage, and compassion define the true hero. Keep this in your heart, for the shadow grows, and Olympus will test you more harshly than ever. Heracles bowed, understanding that the trial was both gift and burden. A token of divine insight, a silver medallion etched with the symbols of balance and courage, appeared in his hand, a reminder that his path would be long and perilous. Outside, the plateau shifted. Clouds stirred unnaturally, lightning flickered across distant skies, and the first echoes of an approaching storm rolled across the mountains. The world beyond the trial awaited him, cursed seas, spectral guardians, and the creeping corruption of Olympus itself. Heracles sheathed his weapons, tightened his cloak, and set forth once more, stronger in heart, sharper in mind, and ready to confront the darkness rising across the world. A pall of mist hung over the coast as Heracles descended toward the shore, the sea stretching before him like a black mirror. The water, dark and still, was unnaturally cold, each wave moving sluggishly as if bound by some invisible chain. Legends whispered that this was no ordinary sea. It was the Acheron, a liminal river once confined to the underworld, now creeping into the mortal world, carrying the weight of death, despair, and ancient sorrow. The wind, once still, moaned through the jagged cliffs, carrying a faint echo of voices long silenced. Heracles tightened his cloak around his shoulders, gripping the hilt of his club. He had faced beasts, monsters, and divine wrath, yet the sense of dread that filled the air was unlike anything he had ever felt. Athena's voice came to him once more, soft yet insistent. The path across the cursed sea is not won by strength alone. Souls linger here, bound by regret, vengeance, and fear. You must act with discernment, courage, and compassion. The shadow watches, and even the water itself tests your resolve. Before him, a small vessel floated silently on the dark water, its hull blackened as if carved from the night itself. No mortal hands had made it. Heracles stepped onto the deck, the wood creaking under his weight, and the boat moved forward without oars or sail, guided by some unseen force. The moment he set foot, the sea began to stir. Ghostly shapes emerged from the black waters, warriors long dead, their forms translucent yet solid enough to wield swords, shields, and spears. Their eyes glowed like dim embers, and their voices rose in unison, chanting in a language older than the hills. Heracles raised his club. The spectral warriors advanced, yet he sensed they were not mindless. These were guardians of the cursed sea, spirits bound to test those who dared to traverse it. Their challenge was not merely physical, it was moral, mental, and spiritual. The first wave of specters struck. Heracles dodged with precision, his movements honed by years of labor and battle. Each swing of his club dispersed a phantom, yet the specters reformed instantly, returning in greater numbers. Then he realized he could not fight them as he would a mortal enemy. He needed insight, courage, and the ability to discern the truth of their purpose. He lowered his club and spoke. "I am Heracles of Tiryns. I seek passage across your waters to confront a darkness rising in Olympus. Stand aside if I am worthy." The spirits hesitated, their forms flickering. One, taller and more imposing than the rest, stepped forward. His voice was a hollow echo. "Many have come with strength and pride, but none have passed without fear, humility, or sorrow. Do you bear all three, hero? Or do you seek only glory?" Heracles' mind turned inward, recalling his past deeds and failures. He remembered the innocent lives lost in his labors, the friends he could not save, the arrogance that had once led him to strike without thought. He bowed his head. "I bear my sins as well as my victories. I seek to right what I can, not for glory, but because the world demands it." The spectral warrior studied him, eyes glowing brighter. Then, without warning, the sea erupted in a storm of shadow and foam. Waves taller than cliffs rose, crashing against the vessel, yet it remained steady, guided by some unseen divine hand. Heracles realized that the sea itself was testing him, not just with enemies, but with fear, isolation, and the weight of responsibility. Hours, or perhaps days, passed as Heracles navigated the waters. Specters rose again and again, each encounter more harrowing than the last. Some whispered temptations, vengeance, pride, or the promise of immortal glory if he surrendered his moral code. Others taunted him with visions of mortal suffering, questioning his worth, his courage, and his resolve. Through it all, Heracles kept his focus, using not only his strength but his judgment and compassion. He offered aid to spirits trapped by regret, speaking words of forgiveness or understanding, helping them release their bonds. Slowly, the phantoms ceased their assault, bowing in acknowledgement of his wisdom and heart. At the heart of the cursed sea, a massive whirlpool roared, black as obsidian. From its center, the shadow of a titanic serpent rose, another test from the shadow, feeding on fear and despair. Heracles braced himself, gripping his club and preparing for combat. Yet Athena's warning echoed in his mind. The shadow tempts with force, but only courage tempered by wisdom can prevail. He realized he could not destroy the creature with brute strength alone. Instead, he leapt onto its coils, moving with precision, and used the environment to his advantage. The serpent roared, but Heracles' resolve never wavered. By combining cunning, courage, and moral clarity, he forced the creature into the whirlpool's edge, where the currents of the cursed waters themselves dragged it down into the abyss. The sea calmed. The spectral guardians bowed, their forms fading into mist as the waters became still once more. Heracles looked out at the horizon, where faint light now pierced the dark clouds. The journey was not yet over. Olympus still trembled. The shadow's corruption spread farther than he had realized, and new trials awaited on land and sky. With a deep breath, he stepped onto the shore beyond the cursed waters. The land was scarred and strange, the air heavy with the smell of salt and shadow. The next challenge awaited him: the broken gods, who held forbidden truths about the shadow and its origin. Heracles adjusted his cloak, tightened his grip on his club, and began the long trek inland. He was stronger, wiser, and yet the weight of the world pressed upon him more than ever. The shadow had tested him across the cursed sea, but the hardest trials, against gods, titans, and the darkness of Olympus itself, were yet to come. The land beyond the cursed sea was fractured, scarred by storms that no mortal hand could withstand. Trees twisted in unnatural shapes, rivers ran in jagged, impossible directions, and mountains seemed to breathe, heaving as though the earth itself were alive. Heracles pressed onward, boots crunching over cracked stone and dry earth, his cloak whipping in the wind. Somewhere above, the sun struggled through roiling clouds, its light fragmented like shards of glass. Athena had guided him here with cryptic words. The broken gods wait. They are those cast down from Olympus, forgotten or betrayed, who hold knowledge even the living gods fear. Listen well, Heracles, for their truths will shape your path, and the shadow's hunger will grow if you do not. Heracles' thoughts wandered to Zeus, to Olympus, to the shadow that had begun its insidious spread. He had fought monsters and survived spectral armies, but nothing prepared him for the weight of divine secrets. The broken gods were not allies. They were truths incarnate, fractured, and dangerous, holding pieces of the puzzle that could either guide him or destroy him. The first figure he encountered emerged from a fissure in the mountains, a goddess of twilight, her body fractured like cracked crystal. Her voice was a melody of sorrow and warning. "Heracles," she said, "you have walked the cursed sea, faced illusions of your own soul, and yet you stand here. Few mortals or gods have the courage to approach us." Heracles bowed, respectful yet wary. "I seek knowledge of the shadow. Its corruption spreads through Olympus, and I must know how to stop it." The goddess's eyes, one silver, one black, flickered with an unsettling light. "The shadow is older than Olympus, older than the Titans. It was born from the arrogance of gods, from the pride and selfishness that even now corrodes the heavens. To fight it, you must understand its origin and its hunger." Another figure stepped from the shadows, a god of storms, once revered for his fury, now broken and diminished, his eyes hollow yet burning with bitter knowledge. Zeus falters because pride blinds him. The shadow consumes arrogance and fear alike. It is not a creature of flesh alone. It is the reflection of Olympus itself. Every insult, every slight, every act of hubris feeds it. And it knows you, Heracles. Your strength, your fame, even your failures are its sustenance. Heracles clenched his fists, absorbing the weight of their words. Then how do I stop it? How do I fight something that feeds on the very pride of the gods? The first goddess's cracked lips curled into a faint smile. By embracing the truth, not all battles are fought with muscle. Some are fought with wisdom, courage, and the willingness to see the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. The shadow is patient. It will wait, but it will also test you, and soon it will strike at Olympus itself. The storm god added, his voice bitter but clear, "And you will not be alone. Others walk the earth and heavens, watching, waiting, and choosing. But be warned, trust is scarce, even among those cast down from Olympus. We are fractured, just as the world is fractured. Knowledge carries risk, Heracles, as does action." Heracles stepped forward, determination hardening in his chest. "I have faced monsters, illusions, and spectral armies. I will face gods, broken or not, and the shadow itself. I will not fail." The broken gods exchanged glances, silent yet heavy with meaning. Finally, the goddess of twilight gestured toward a fissure leading into the mountains. "Follow. There is more you must see. More truths that will prepare you for what comes. But know this, once you see, you cannot unsee. The path will weigh upon your heart as much as your arms." As Heracles moved deeper into the mountain, the air grew colder, thicker, charged with energy that hummed in rhythm with the earth itself. Images appeared along the walls, visions of ancient Olympus, of titans chained, of gods fighting amongst themselves, of mortals suffering as divine quarrels unfolded above. The shadow pulsed faintly in the background, feeding on these memories, growing stronger with each revelation. Within the deepest chamber, the broken gods revealed the final secret, a mirror-like pool, its surface black as obsidian. The reflection showed a version of Olympus consumed by the shadow, Zeus turned tyrant, gods corrupted, mortals enslaved, and the shadow towering above all, an embodiment of arrogance and fear. Heracles understood the stakes more clearly than ever. The shadow was not just a threat, it was the inevitable reflection of divine failure. And to defeat it, he could not rely solely on strength. He would need allies, strategy, wisdom, and above all, moral clarity. The gods themselves whispered prophecies of what might come, battles in heaven, alliances forged and broken, and choices that would weigh on his soul. Heracles listened, absorbing every detail, every warning, every truth. He left the chamber knowing the shadow's threat was real, immense, and patient. Stepping out of the mountain into the dim light of evening, Heracles felt the wind return, carrying with it the scent of both rain and shadow. He had learned the origin of the shadow, the vulnerability of Olympus, and the fractured nature of even those who held divine power. The journey ahead would take him to Tartarus, to Prometheus, and deeper into the heart of corruption itself. He tightened his grip on his club, gazed at the distant horizon where storms swirled unnaturally, and whispered to himself, "I know what I face now, and I will face it, no matter the cost." The air grew heavier with each step as Heracles descended into Tartarus, the very earth seeming to recoil beneath his weight. Here, darkness was not simply the absence of light, it was a presence, thick and suffocating, clinging to the skin, filling the lungs with despair. The winds were voices whispering threats and temptations, murmuring of failure, betrayal, and the futility of mortal courage. Athena's voice had warned him, echoing in memory. Tartarus tests not only your strength but your spirit. There lies Prometheus, bound by chains older than the gods themselves. He holds knowledge you will need, but every bargain carries a cost. Choose wisely, Heracles. The hero's path was jagged and treacherous, carved by the anguish of centuries of titans and mortals alike. Every step stirred echoes of suffering, echoes of Prometheus's punishment, chains clanging across time, and the distant tortured cries of titans who had defied the gods. It was here that Olympus's arrogance had met its first punishment, and the shadow, though unseen, stirred with anticipation. At last, he reached the inner chamber of Tartarus. The cavernous space stretched endlessly, walls slick with moisture, veins of fire coursing through stone like molten blood. And there, chained atop a jagged black altar, was Prometheus. The Titan's body was scarred, wings broken, yet his eyes glowed with an unyielding fire that defied even eternity itself. Heracles approached cautiously, Prometheus, he said, voice echoing in the vast darkness. I seek knowledge. The shadow rises across Olympus, consuming gods, mortals, and the world alike. I have come to ask, what is it and how do I stop it? Prometheus turned his head slowly, chains rattling. His voice was gravelly yet resonant, carrying the weight of centuries. Heracles of tyrants, he said, you walk a path few dare tread. The shadow is older than your gods, older than the Titans, born from the arrogance, pride, and fear that even now festers in Olympus. It is not a mere creature. It is a reflection, a mirror of divine corruption made manifest. Heracles clenched his fists, gripping his club. If it is born from Olympus, then how do I fight it? How do I face something that is part of the gods themselves? Prometheus's eyes gleamed with knowledge. You cannot fight it alone. No mortal or god could. The shadow feeds on pride, on fear, on the arrogance that blinds the mighty. To confront it, you must understand the chains that bind even the gods, their hubris, their vanity, their failures, and strike where it is weakest, in their reflection. But to learn this, you must make a bargain. Heracles' brow furrowed. A bargain? What do you ask of me? Prometheus smiled faintly, a mixture of amusement and sorrow. I offer knowledge, Heracles. I will teach you the origin of the shadow, the way it grows, and the secret to confronting it. In return, you must swear an oath that what you learn will serve the balance of gods and mortals alike. That you will act not for revenge, not for glory, but to restore what Olympus has lost. The choice is yours, and the price may be heavier than you imagine. Heracles considered this, the weight of centuries pressing on his shoulders. His labors had taught him that every action had consequences, and every victory demanded sacrifice. I swear, he said finally, that I will act to restore balance. Not for pride, not for glory, but to save the world. Prometheus's chains rattled and glowed with an otherworldly light. Then listen well, hero. The shadow was born when the gods first claimed dominion over mortals and each other. Their pride, their arrogance, their unending quarrels created a void, a space where corruption could take form. It is patient, eternal, and adaptable. Every act of hubris feeds it, every betrayal strengthens it, every fear and weakness in Olympus is its nourishment. Heracles' mind raced. Then the shadow is not just a force of evil, it is a reflection of everything wrong with Olympus. But if I know its origin, can I use that against it? Prometheus' gaze was unwavering. Knowledge alone is not enough. You must act, and you must inspire others to act alongside you. Gods, mortals, and even the broken or forgotten must rise. Only together can you hope to challenge a darkness that mirrors Olympus itself. Then, with a gesture, Prometheus revealed the final piece of the secret, a vision of the shadow's true form, not as a beast, but as a towering, shifting figure of darkness that bore the visage of Zeus himself, twisted by pride and unchecked power. It moved through Olympus, bending gods and mortals alike to its will, and feeding on every crack in their resolve. Heracles felt a chill, the enormity of the task pressing upon him. To fight the shadow would be to face the very reflection of Olympus's mightiest god, and through it, confront the failings of the divine and mortal worlds alike. Prometheus's voice broke the silence. Remember, Heracles, knowledge is a weapon, but only if wielded wisely. Courage is your shield, and wisdom your sword. You have been chosen not merely for your strength, but for your heart, your mind, and your willingness to endure what others cannot. Go now and face what awaits. Olympus trembles, and the shadow waits patiently. With that, Heracles descended back into the shadowed passageways of Tartarus, the Titan's words ringing in his ears. The path ahead was perilous, filled with monsters, gods, and trials of the spirit. Yet he carried with him the truth of the shadow's origin, the understanding of its patience and cunning, and the clarity of purpose that would guide him through the fires to come. Emerging into the world above, the winds of Tartarus gave way to the faint chill of mortal air. Heracles gazed toward Olympus, distant yet looming, clouds darkening unnaturally over its golden halls. The shadow was no longer an abstract threat. It was real, sentient, and inevitable, but now he knew its secret. And with that knowledge, Heracles' next steps would take him to the divine heart of Olympus itself, the flame of purity, and the confrontation that would ignite the war between light and shadow. The mountains that rose beneath Olympus were no longer merely stone and earth. They pulsed with a hidden power, the rhythm of fire and divine energy coursing through veins of magma deep within the earth. Heracles ascended the jagged cliffs, each step echoing across the valleys below, the wind carrying whispers of ancient warnings and the faint scent of brimstone. The shadow's presence lingered, subtle yet suffocating, twisting the very air around him into uneasy shapes that vanished when he looked directly at them. Athena had given him no map, no guidance beyond her cryptic warning. The flame of purity lies beneath Olympus, where the heart of the gods burns. Only one with courage, wisdom, and unyielding strength may endure the trial. Beware, for the shadow watches, and the fire will test not just your body, but your soul. Heracles' heart thumped in his chest. He had faced monsters, spectral armies, and the moral crucibles of gods, yet this challenge felt different. Here, every step carried weight, not only in stone, but in destiny. He was no longer merely a hero among mortals. He was a champion standing between Olympus and an ever-growing darkness. The entrance to the divine heart lay hidden within a cavern, its mouth marked by cracks that emitted a faint red glow, the hum of raw elemental power vibrating through the rock. As Heracles stepped inside, the air grew unbearably hot, thick with smoke and the scent of sulfur, yet within it lay the hum of divinity, a living flame that pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the god's domain. At first, the passage was narrow, forcing him to crawl along jagged stones, feeling the heat licking at his skin. The walls themselves seemed alive, veins of molten energy pulsating with an almost conscious rhythm. With every step, the whispers of the shadow grew louder, testing him, taunting him. The gods fail, mortals perish, and you cannot stop it. Give in, turn back. Become part of the darkness. Heracles clenched his teeth and pressed forward, muscles straining and sweat mingling with soot. He recalled Prometheus's warning: knowledge alone is not enough. Courage is your shield, wisdom your sword. He would need both here, where the very earth sought to consume him. The first trial revealed itself as the chamber widened. A river of molten flame stretched before him, flowing in unnatural currents that defied gravity, forming bridges and whirlpools of fire. Shadows flickered along the edges, taking the shapes of monsters from his past: hydra heads, the Nemean lion, spectral serpents, each animated not by flesh, but by flame and malice. Heracles leapt across the flowing magma, his club in hand, dodging snapping jaws and whipping flames. Each step required precision, courage, and trust in his instincts. The shadows struck with terrifying speed, yet he did not fight them with force alone. He anticipated, used the environment, and moved with a balance of strength and cunning, honed through countless trials. At the far side of the molten river, the chamber opened into a vast hall, its ceiling lost in darkness, walls lined with molten glyphs that pulsed with divine language. At the center burned the flame of purity, a pillar of light and heat unlike any fire he had ever seen. It was alive, sentient, and radiating a power that made the air itself hum. But standing before the flame was another test, a guardian shaped from living fire, its eyes burning like the sun, limbs flowing and flickering with the pulse of divine energy. The shadow's whispers taunted him, suggesting fear, doubt, and pride as weapons to undermine his resolve. Heracles took a deep breath and advanced. He did not strike at the guardian with force alone. Instead, he matched its rhythm, moving in sync with the pulse of the fire, understanding its patterns, respecting its power. Each swing of his club, each step, was a dialogue, a negotiation between hero and elemental divine force. Slowly, the guardian yielded, dissolving into pure flame that ascended to merge with the pillar of the flame of purity. Heracles approached the fire itself, feeling its intensity pressing against his flesh, yet also sensing its essence as a living core of Olympus's power. He reached into the heart of the flame, drawing a fragment imbued with both cleansing light and divine heat. The energy coursed through him, searing yet invigorating, and he felt clarity and strength like never before. The shadow's whispers grew frantic, as though the presence of pure divine light threatened to reveal its secrets and weaken its hold on Olympus. Athena's voice echoed softly, though her form was absent. "You have endured, Heracles. The flame of purity will guide you, shield you, and reveal the shadow where it hides. But beware, the shadow is patient, and Olympus's corruption runs deep." The final trials draw near. As Heracles emerged from the divine heart, holding the fragment of the flame of purity, the world outside trembled. The mountains quaked, the clouds churned, and the faint stench of shadow lingered on the wind. The stage was set for the coming war, the shadow's rise, the betrayal of gods, and the ultimate confrontation that would demand every ounce of strength, wisdom, and courage he possessed. Heracles knew now that brute force alone would not save Olympus. The flame of purity was a beacon, yes, but it was also a reminder. The greatest power lay not just in strength, but in discernment, resilience, and moral clarity. With the flame in hand, he set his gaze upward toward Olympus, knowing the next steps would bring divine war, betrayal, and a test unlike any he had faced before. Olympus trembled. The golden halls that had once gleamed like the sun itself now shivered under a creeping darkness. Lightning flickered erratically across the skies. Thunder responded late, or not at all, to Zeus's commands. And the air was thick with a sense of dread that even the gods could not dispel. Heracles stood at the threshold of the divine realm, the fragment of the flame of purity held firmly in his hand. Its radiant heat pulsed against his palm, a living beacon of balance and power. He could feel its energy probing the cracks in Olympus, seeking out corruption, revealing weaknesses that even the gods had tried to hide from themselves. The shadow had come. It began subtly, as shadows do. A whisper along the corridors of the god's palace, a chill curling around marble columns, a distortion of light where golden rays should shine. But soon, the darkness grew, twisting forms, bending the minds of gods. Athena's warnings echoed in Heracles' mind. The shadow reflects what lies within Olympus. Pride, arrogance, vengeance. It feeds on the sins of the gods themselves. The first to succumb were minor deities, spirits once loyal to the Olympian order. They began to turn on one another, accusations muttered like poison through hallowed halls. The air became electric, tension so thick that even lightning feared to strike. Heracles moved cautiously, the flame of purity illuminating his path. Shadows writhed around him, flickering and coalescing into forms both grotesque and familiar. Each seemed to whisper, "You cannot stop what is inevitable. Olympus is dying, and you will fall with it." Then came the first direct attack, a corrupted Hephaestus, whose forge had once symbolized creation and ingenuity. Now his hammer struck as a weapon of shadow, molten metal black as obsidian, striking with intent to destroy. Heracles dodged, rolling across the polished marble floors, and countered with the flame of purity, dispersing the corrupted heat in a wave of cleansing light. He realized that brute force alone would not be enough. The shadow had infected Olympus deeply. It could twist allies into enemies, weaken resolve, and prey on pride. Even Zeus, normally a pillar of divine might, faltered, his eyes wide with doubt as lightning refused to heed his command. Heracles' path led him to the central hall, where the Olympian council had gathered, or what remained of it. Hera glared at him with suspicion, Athena's voice faint but urging clarity, and Zeus's form wavered under the strain of the shadow's reflection. Heracles raised the flame high. "This ends now," he shouted, voice carrying across the hall. strong enough to pierce through doubt and fear. The shadow is a reflection of what you are, not what you must be. Stand with me or fall with it. The shadow responded not with words, but with forms. Monstrous, shifting figures that bore the faces of each Olympian god, twisted by arrogance and pride. They lunged with strength, speed, and cunning, each strike meant to test not only his body but his mind. Heracles dodged, struck, and countered, moving with a rhythm honed over countless labors, spectral battles, and divine trials. Athena's voice guided him. The shadow is not invincible. It is a mirror. Show it what Olympus could be, not what it fears it is. Your choices reflect truth and hope, Heracles roared, channeling the flame of purity through his body. Light exploded outward, illuminating the halls, purging the corruption from the nearest deities. Hera, freed from the shadow's grip, raised her hands, joining in the fight, and slowly, other gods who had resisted fell back into clarity. But the shadow had grown stronger. It coalesced into a towering figure that mirrored Zeus himself, eyes glowing with divine malice and pride. Every strike reflected Zeus's own hubris. Every movement threatened to undo centuries of order. Heracles realized the truth. The final battle would not be against the shadow alone. It would be against the reflection of the arrogance that had shaped Olympus. The hall shook. Columns crumbled. Thunder roared, but now in chaotic bursts. Gods turned on one another under the shadow's influence, and mortals watching from below trembled at the divine chaos. Heracles pressed forward, stepping between allies and foes, raising the flame high to illuminate the path of hope. With a voice that carried like rolling thunder, he declared, "This corruption ends today. Olympus is not just the domain of the arrogant, it is the home of courage, wisdom, and those willing to defend balance." The shadow screamed, a sound that ripped through reality itself. Its massive form surged forward, striking at Heracles with divine might. But he met it with the flame, channeling all his experience, wisdom, and moral resolve into a single, brilliant strike. Light collided with shadow, a force of balance against the chaos, and for a moment, the entire realm of Olympus shuddered as if holding its breath. The battle raged, fierce and unyielding. Gods and mortals alike watched, some inspired, some terrified, as the hero who had conquered monsters, spectral armies, and divine trials now stood against the living corruption of Olympus itself. Each clash tested his strength, each maneuver tested his mind, each decision tested his heart. And yet, even as the shadow recoiled from the flame's light, it whispered promises. You cannot stop what you are a part of. You are a reflection of pride, just as I am. Heracles paused, remembering the lessons of the labyrinth, Athena's trial, the cursed sea, and Prometheus's warning. He was not merely a hero of strength. He was a champion of balance. To defeat the shadow, he had to reflect Olympus's better nature, not simply fight its corruption. He raised the flame once more, his voice steady and resolute. I am Heracles of Tyrans. I fight not for pride, not for vengeance, but for balance. This ends here! The light flared, consuming shadow after shadow, revealing the true forms of the gods, the halls of Olympus trembling yet standing. The shadow screeched, a sound of rage and disbelief, but the reflection of Olympus's courage and virtue began to push it back. Heracles knew the fight was far from over. The shadow had been challenged, but it remained a cunning, patient force, biding its time. Still, the first victory had been won. The corruption could be resisted, the arrogance confronted, and the balance restored, if the hero and the gods could act with wisdom, courage, and unity. The stage was set for the coming betrayals, the mortal and divine uprisings, and the war that would decide the fate of Olympus itself. Heracles stood amidst the shattered halls, flame in hand, ready to lead the charge against darkness, knowing that the hardest trials were yet to come. The sky over Olympus was a fractured tapestry of gold and shadow. Lightning flickered without rhythm, Thunder roared without command, and the air itself seemed to shiver with unease. Heracles had fought monsters, spectral armies, and the rising shadow itself, wielding the flame of purity to illuminate the corruption that gnawed at Olympus's heart. Yet even as the darkness receded in places, a new threat emerged from those he had once called allies. Zeus, king of the gods, sat upon his throne in the hall of Olympus, face grim and eyes clouded with doubt. Heracles approached, flame in hand, ready to rally the gods and strike at the shadow's heart. But before he could speak, the air shifted, thickening like molten lead, and Zeus's voice rang out, "Heracles!" Step no further. You have walked a path of fire and shadow, yes, but the chaos you bring threatens Olympus itself. I cannot allow it to continue. Heracles froze. Zeus, I have fought the shadow. I bear the flame of purity, and I— Silence. Zeus thundered. With a gesture, divine chains, woven from strands of his own lightning and tempered by the weight of Olympus's authority, erupted from the throne, striking Heracles' limbs. The chains wrapped around him, searing yet unbroken, pulling him to the ground. Each link glowed with divine power, binding him physically and spiritually, testing not his strength but his resolve. The gods in the hall watched silently, some in awe, some in fear. Athena's voice whispered faintly in Heracles' mind, urging caution. The shadow corrupts even the hearts of Olympus. Trust is rare, even among gods. Heracles struggled, the chains tightening with every move. Zeus, I fight to save Olympus. The shadow is consuming us all. Do not let arrogance blind you. Zeus's eyes flickered with uncertainty, yet his voice remained cold. I see the shadow, Heracles, but I also see its reflection in you. You wield divine power, influence mortal hearts, and act beyond your station. How can I trust one mortal, even one who bears the flame, when the fate of Olympus hangs in balance? The hall of Olympus seemed to pulse with tension. The gods whispered among themselves, uncertainty and fear spreading like wildfire. Heracles realized that the true danger was no longer only the shadow. It was the fracture within Olympus itself, the mistrust that pride and fear had sown. Chains of lightning tightened. Heracles' muscles strained, and the pain seared through him like molten metal. But within the agony, a clarity emerged. He could not fight this battle alone. Not brute force, not anger. The flame of purity burned against his chest, a reminder of his purpose, and he drew strength from the lessons of every labor, trial, and confrontation that had shaped him. The shadow's influence was subtle but present, whispering from the edges of perception. Even the hero falls when the gods turn against him. Alone you will fail. Alone you are nothing. Heracles closed his eyes, centering himself. I am not alone. My purpose is greater than pride or fear. Olympus can survive, but only if the hearts of gods and mortals align. I will endure, no matter the chains. With a surge of strength and clarity, he channeled the flame of purity through his body. Light erupted from him, illuminating the hall, and for a moment the chains faltered. Lightning that had bound him sizzled and writhed, unable to contain the divine energy of truth, courage, and moral clarity. Zeus recoiled, his grip on judgment wavering. The other gods watched, torn between fear, doubt, and inspiration. Heracles rose unbroken, holding the flame aloft. The shadow seeks to divide us, to make even gods distrust one another. Do not fall for it. Stand together and we can end this corruption. Hera, who had watched the shadows rise with growing dread, stepped forward. Heracles speaks truth. The corruption is beyond any one god. It is Olympus's failing, reflected and magnified. We must act together, or all is lost. The chains of betrayal began to loosen, not because Zeus relented fully, but because the moral force of the flame, combined with the hero's courage and clarity, had disrupted the shadow's influence. Heracles, though battered and bound, stood as a living testament to what Olympus could be if its champions acted with wisdom, courage, and unity. Yet the shadow was patient. Even as the chains broke and the gods rallied, its whispers lingered. This is only the beginning. Even the strongest can be broken. The arrogance of Olympus will feed me again. Heracles knew it. The war was far from over. Betrayal, rebellion, and the test of mortal and divine hearts were only just beginning. But he had survived the first fracture. He had turned mistrust into resolve, chains into a lesson, and fear into unity. The stage was set for the next chapter, the mortal flame rising against divine corruption, the rebellion that would pit heroes and fallen gods alike against the shadow's unstoppable tide. Heracles' role had shifted, not merely a champion of strength, but a leader, a beacon, and the fulcrum upon which the fate of Olympus itself would balance. The sun rose over the mortal lands, but its light seemed dim, struggling against the creeping shadow that had begun to spread from Olympus. Heracles, having broken Zeus's chains and survived the treacheries of divine mistrust, stood atop a jagged hill overlooking the valley below. The flame of purity burned bright in his hand, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill of fear and doubt that had begun to grip both gods and mortals alike. Athena's voice echoed in memory. The shadow grows stronger when Olympus falters. Mortals and fallen gods alike must rise, for the hero alone cannot bear this burden. Unite those who would resist Heracles and kindle a flame that even darkness cannot smother. Heracles' mind raced. He had faced monsters, specters, the cursed sea, and the corrupted halls of Olympus. He had confronted Prometheus and learned the shadow's secret, yet he knew that knowledge alone would not suffice. Strength and courage were essential, but this was a war that required unity, resolve, and moral clarity on a scale that could inspire both gods and mortals. He turned his gaze to the valley below. Villages lay in fear, citizens trembling as the shadow's corruption crept ever closer. Yet Heracles saw potential allies, souls unbroken by despair, ready to fight if led with purpose. He began his descent, moving swiftly yet cautiously, seeking out those who would stand with him. The first to join him were mortals, warriors hardened by toil and battle, scholars and seers, each drawn by the light of the flame and the promise of hope. "Heracles!" a young warrior cried, eyes wide with awe. "We will follow you if you lead us." Heracles nodded, the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders. "Then rise with me. Together we can resist the shadow. Together we can show Olympus and the world that courage and unity are stronger than fear and corruption." Word spread quickly. Mortals from across Greece, farmers, soldiers, artisans, and kings, gathered to join Heracles' cause. Alongside them appeared the fallen gods, exiled and broken, yet still imbued with divine power. They had seen the rise of the shadow, and many recognized the truth in the hero's call. Olympus's arrogance had created the corruption, and only by rising together could it be undone. Among them were gods of lesser rank. Pan, the god of the wilds, his eyes wary but loyal. Hecate, mistress of magic and shadow, bringing her knowledge to counter the darkness. And Hephaestus, once corrupted, now purified by the flame's light, offering his forge to craft weapons and tools for the coming war. The shadow, sensing the gathering strength, stirred in anticipation. Its whispers reached across the skies and the mountains, seeking to sow fear and division. "They are but mortals and exiles. Alone they are nothing. Their courage will falter. Olympus will fall, and all will feed me." Heracles stood atop a ridge, flame held high. It is not fear but unity that defines strength. It is not solitude but courage that conquers darkness. We rise together, or we fall together. The shadow cannot break what we hold in common. With a roar that echoed through valleys and mountains, mortals and gods alike raised their weapons, prepared to follow Heracles into battle. Shields shimmered with divine light. Swords gleamed with mortal craftsmanship, and magical wards flared, illuminating the valley like a constellation of defiance against the encroaching darkness. The first skirmishes began at the valley's edge. Shadowy minions, forms both monstrous and twisted from Olympus's own reflection, attacked in waves. Heracles led the charge, flame blazing, striking with precision and power, yet always mindful of morale. He inspired mortals and gods alike, showing them that bravery and wisdom could counter even the deepest corruption. Hours became days, the war escalating as the shadow poured forth from Olympus itself. Mortals learned to trust divine allies. Gods rediscovered purpose in their fallen brethren, and Heracles' leadership became a beacon, a focal point around which hope crystallized. But the shadow was cunning. It did not merely attack with brute force. It whispered into hearts, planted seeds of doubt, and twisted desires into betrayal. Heracles found himself mediating disputes, quelling fear, and reinforcing unity as often as he swung his club or guided the flame. Leadership, he realized, was as much about moral strength as physical might. At the height of the campaign, Heracles stood atop a hill overlooking the battlefield, flame in hand, and addressed his assembled forces. Today, we rise not as mortals or gods alone, but as a single force, united against corruption and despair. Let Olympus see that we will not yield, that we will not falter, and that the shadow will not claim what courage and honor defend. A roar rose from the valley below, mortals and gods alike, their voices echoing into the heavens. The shadow writhed in response, its form flickering, testing, probing for weaknesses, yet the resolve of the united force held. The battle had only begun, yet a new hope had been kindled. Heracles understood that the war for Olympus would be long and perilous, that betrayal, moral challenges, and divine wrath awaited. But the flame he carried, literal and symbolic, was a beacon for those willing to resist, to rise, and to act when the world itself seemed poised on the brink of darkness. With determination hardening his resolve, Heracles prepared for the next phase, the war in heaven, where gods and mortals alike would face the shadow in full scale, and the fate of Olympus and all mortals would hang in the balance. The skies above Olympus were aflame. Lightning cracked like war drums, thunder shook the heavens, and the air itself shimmered with the tension of divine conflict. Heracles stood atop a cragged summit, flame of purity in hand, gazing upward at the golden spires of Olympus, now partially shrouded in the creeping darkness of the shadow. The war had come, not as whispers, nor as isolated corruption, but as an all-consuming battle between light and shadow, gods and monsters, mortals and the forces of reflection itself. Athena's counsel echoed in his mind. The shadow is patient, Heracles. It has twisted Olympus's pride into its weapon. Every god who doubts you, every mortal who fears, strengthens it. But the courage of the united, the clarity of purpose, and the flame you carry can tip the balance. Below him, armies gathered, mortals armed with swords, spears and makeshift shields trained not only in combat but in faith. Fallen gods lending their powers to the cause, from Hecate's shadow magic to Hephaestus's reforged weapons. Even some Olympians had begun to resist their own corruption, their loyalty wavering toward justice. The shadow's presence surged, a living darkness towering over Olympus's halls, constantly shifting, now mirroring Zeus in visage, now forming monstrous, unrecognizable shapes. Its voice resonated across the heavens, a cacophony of fear, doubt, and arrogance. You cannot resist what you are part of. Mortals, gods, heroes, all reflections of pride. You will fail, and Olympus will feed me. Heracles gripped the flame tighter. We are not defined by pride alone. We are defined by courage, by wisdom, by what we choose to defend. Olympus may have erred, but it can rise again. The first strike came from above. Corrupted Zeus, lightning clawed and eyes aflame with shadow reflection, descending upon the forces of resistance. Mortals scattered, divine energy clashing with mortal steel. Yet Heracles surged forward, flame blazing, cutting through the dark bolts like sunlight through fog. Beside him, fallen gods unleashed their might. Hecate wove spells of binding, shadow, and light entwined to trap fragments of the shadow, while Pan led mortals through the chaos, guiding flanks and striking from unexpected angles. Hephaestus's weapons, forged in the purified fire of the flame, struck with precision, cutting through spectral minions that surged forth from the shadow's vast mass. Heracles' movements were both leadership and combat. He inspired with courage, commanded with clarity, and fought with the power of his labors and the flame's light. Every blow he struck illuminated the battlefield. Every rallying cry united mortal and divine hearts against despair. Yet the shadow was cunning. It split, attacking not only physically but mentally. Heracles' allies saw visions of their deepest fears, of loved ones corrupted or lost, of Olympus falling regardless of their efforts. Betrayal whispered among gods, minor deities swayed by the shadow's reflection, uncertain if their loyalty would be to Olympus, to themselves, or to the hero who had challenged divine authority. Heracles confronted the shadow directly, leaping through swirls of darkness, flame of purity held high. The air crackled as the shadow mirrored his every movement, every strike reflecting not just his body but his doubts, his past failures, the burden of his labors. "You are mortal," it hissed. "Your strength is fleeting, your resolve is fragile. You are not Zeus, not a god. You cannot prevail," Heracles roared, striking with both force and moral clarity, channeling the flame not as a weapon, but as a beacon. Light spread, revealing cracks in the shadow, illuminating the illusions that had plagued gods and mortals alike. One by one, corrupted Olympians hesitated, then returned to clarity. Mortals surged forward, inspired by the hero who wielded the flame not as a weapon of destruction, but as a symbol of unity and hope. The battle escalated to the palace itself. Pillars shattered, golden halls cracked, and celestial storms raged uncontrollably. The shadow roared, forming massive limbs and eyes that reflected centuries of divine arrogance and mortal fear. Yet Heracles pressed on, flame blazing, calling upon every ally, mortal and divine, to stand together. In the chaos, he found Zeus, still struggling against his own reflection. "Father," Heracles called, voice carrying over the maelstrom, "the shadow is not your enemy alone. It is Olympus's reflection. Fight with me, not against me!" Zeus hesitated, lightning faltering in his grasp, and for a moment, clarity returned. The shadow recoiled at this unity, its form flickering, revealing its vulnerability. It thrived on division, on distrust, on the arrogance that fractured Olympus. Heracles struck again, this time not alone. Mortals, fallen gods, and newly awakened Olympians surged in unison, combining mortal ingenuity, divine power, and the moral clarity of those who chose courage over fear. The shadow shrieked, its colossal form beginning to collapse under the force of unified resistance. But even as it faltered, it whispered, a promise of persistence. "You may win today, but arrogance and pride will rise again. I am patient. I am eternal." Heracles, standing amidst the chaos, flame blazing, knew the battle was not the end. It was the turning point. Olympus had been tested, gods and mortals had proven their courage, and the shadow's first great defeat had begun. Yet the true confrontation, the final labor, awaited. The sky above Olympus had turned a tempestuous gray, streaked with fire and shadow, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the war that had erupted below. Heracles stood atop the highest spire of the palace, flame of purity blazing in his hand, his cloak whipping in the furious winds. The shadow loomed before him, its colossal form towering over the shattered halls of Olympus, eyes glowing like molten gold, and every movement reflecting the arrogance, pride, and fear of the gods themselves. Athena's voice resonated in his memory, steady and unwavering. "Heracles, this is the culmination of all your labors. The shadow mirrors Olympus, its sins and pride made flesh. You must confront it with strength, wisdom, and moral clarity, for brute force alone will not suffice. Heracles inhaled deeply, recalling the trials he had endured, the labyrinth of echoes, the cursed sea, the flame of purity, and the mortal rebellion. Each challenge had forged him not only in muscle and skill, but in spirit and judgment. He knew that to defeat the shadow, he would need more than strength. He would need unity, insight, and the courage to face the reflection of the god who had once cast him into a life of trials. The shadow's voice echoed across Olympus, a terrifying chorus of Zeus's own power and malice. "You have defied me, mortal. You have united the weak, challenged the divine, and claimed a fragment of what belongs only to the gods. Yet you cannot prevail. You are but flesh, and I am Olympus incarnate." Heracles raised the flame high. "You reflect only what is wrong, not what Olympus can be. I am mortal, yes, but I fight with the courage, wisdom, and unity that you cannot corrupt." The battle began with a cataclysmic clash. The shadow surged forward, limbs striking like storms, each blow threatening to crush the spire beneath Heracles' feet. Lightning cracked, torn from Zeus's own power, twisting and arcing, yet Heracles countered with the flame, a radiant shield of purifying energy. The air burned with the intensity of their confrontation, each strike shattering stone and bending reality itself. The shadow's form shifted constantly, now mirroring Zeus's visage, now fracturing into monstrous amalgamations of gods and beasts alike. It attacked not only physically but mentally, whispering doubts and fears, showing visions of Olympus destroyed, mortals enslaved, and allies turned against one another. Heracles, sweat and blood streaking his brow, steadied himself. "I am not alone. Mortals, gods, fallen and loyal alike, they stand with me. Courage is stronger than fear. Unity is stronger than division." He struck, channeling the full power of the flame, but the shadow absorbed and reflected it, reshaping it into darkness. The struggle was immense, testing every ounce of his strength, every lesson he had learned. Each movement was a dialogue with the shadow, a negotiation of morality, courage, and insight rather than mere force. Seeing an opening, Heracles called to his allies below, their voices joining his in a chorus of defiance. Mortals raised weapons, fallen gods unleashed magic, and even Olympus's wavering deities rallied, their combined energy feeding through Heracles, amplifying the flame's brilliance. The shadow recoiled at the unity, its form flickering, struggling to maintain coherence. Heracles pressed forward, striking at its very core, where arrogance and pride converged into tangible darkness. The shadow's screams echoed through Olympus, a horrifying blend of divine rage and fear. "You think unity can defeat me?" it hissed. "Even Zeus, even Olympus, will fall again." Heracles advanced with a roar, flame blazing like the sun itself. "No, Olympus will rise because courage, wisdom, and unity endure. Your reflection is not the truth. It is only what we choose to resist." With a final surge, he drove the flame of purity into the heart of the shadow. Light exploded outward, illuminating the shattered halls, dispelling darkness and purging corruption. The shadow writhed, twisting into impossible shapes before collapsing into nothingness, its voice fading like a dying storm. "This is the end." The air cleared. The storms abated, leaving only the trembling remnants of Olympus, scarred but still standing. Gods and mortals alike emerged from the battlefield, awestruck and exhausted, yet alive. Heracles stood alone on the spire, flames still blazing, sweat and blood mingling with the dust of the divine battlefield. Zeus descended, his eyes humbled, acknowledging the hero not as a mortal beneath Olympus, but as a champion who had saved it from itself. "Heracles, you have done what even we could not. Olympus owes you its life and perhaps its soul." Heracles lowered the flame. "The victory is not mine alone. It belongs to those who chose courage, unity, and wisdom over fear and pride. Olympus must learn from this, or fall again." The shadow was vanquished for now, but its warning lingered in the hearts of gods and mortals alike. Heracles knew the battle had ended, yet the lessons endured. Power must be tempered, pride must be balanced with humility, and the courage to unite is the greatest strength of all. The first light of morning spread across Olympus, delicate yet radiant, as if the heavens themselves were exhaling after the long night of war. The shadow had been defeated, its monstrous form dissipated into nothingness, yet the scars it had left on the realm of gods and mortals remained. Pillars of the palace lay shattered, divine storms still rumbled faintly across the peaks, and the echoes of the war lingered like a memory heavy with lessons. Heracles stood at the summit of Mount Olympus, flame of purity in hand, its glow now soft and steady, a symbol not only of power but of hope, courage, and unity. He looked down upon the mortal lands below, villages rebuilding, fields recovering, and people emerging from fear with newfound determination. Mortals and gods had endured together, and the bonds forged in the fires of battle were stronger than any force the shadow could muster. Athena's voice, calm and assured, filled his mind. "You have completed the labors beyond labor, Heracles, not as a servant of the gods, nor as a mere hero of mortals, but as a champion of balance itself. Now the dawn rises, not for Olympus alone, but for all who inhabit this world." Heracles exhaled, feeling the weight of centuries of trials finally ease. He had confronted monsters, specters, divine corruption, and the reflection of Olympus's own arrogance. He had faced betrayal, moral crises, and the overwhelming power of a force that thrived on the sins of gods. And yet, he had endured, not because of strength alone, but because of wisdom, courage, and the ability to unite those who had been divided by fear and pride. Below him, Zeus and the Olympians gathered. The king of gods, once haughty and mistrusting, approached with measured steps. "Heracles," he said, voice resonant yet subdued, "you have done what no god alone could have achieved. You have held Olympus together when even we faltered. The flame of purity burns because of your courage, and for that we are humbled." Heracles nodded, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. "The victory is not mine alone. Olympus, gods, and mortals alike must learn that pride and arrogance are as dangerous as any monster. Unity, wisdom, and courage define strength, not mere divine power." The gods, humbled and grateful, began the work of restoration. Temples were reforged, storms cleared, and corrupted shadows purged. Yet even as Olympus rebuilt, the world below responded to the lesson Heracles had imparted. Mortals, inspired by his deeds, formed councils and communities, prepared to defend themselves not only from physical threats, but from the moral decay that could allow another shadow to rise. Prometheus, freed from his eternal chains in gratitude for Heracles' victory, approached the hero. "You have changed the course of gods and men alike," the Titan said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The shadow may be patient, but for now the balance is restored, and your name will echo across eternity as the mortal who stood against Olympus's reflection and prevailed." Heracles looked out across the horizon, the flame of purity burning gently in his grasp. He saw not only Olympus, but the lands of mortals, mountains, rivers, and seas, each renewed in potential and hope. The world was fragile, yes, but resilient. It was a world shaped not only by divine will, but by mortal courage, wisdom, and choice. And then, with a final deep breath, Heracles descended from the summit. He walked among mortals and gods alike, offering guidance, inspiring courage, and ensuring that the lessons of the shadow, of pride, and of unity were not forgotten. The dawn was not merely light, it was the promise of balance restored, of vigilance tempered by wisdom, and of hope forged through trials. The heroes and gods gathered side by side, understanding that the future was not predetermined by power or arrogance, but shaped by the courage to act rightly. Heracles, mortal yet eternal in legend, became the living symbol of that truth. As the sun rose higher, the shadow's whispers were gone, replaced by the quiet hum of life, renewal, and possibility. Olympus would endure, mortals would thrive, and the legacy of courage, unity, and moral strength would carry forward. Heracles paused on a ridge overlooking the world he had helped save. The flame of purity flickered gently in the morning breeze, a reminder that vigilance, courage, and wisdom must always endure. And with that, he walked forward, not as a god, nor merely as a hero, but as a champion whose labors had reshaped the fate of both gods and men. The dawn beyond Olympus had arrived,